Welcome to Superintendent Radio Network. I'm Golf Course Industry Magazine publisher plus editor-in-chief Guy Cipriano. This is episode number 26 of the Disease Discussion podcast, and we're excited for this conversation. Joining us is BASF Senior Technical Specialist, Dr. Emma Lookabaugh, who's always willing to share practical and science-based ways of conveying information you can use to help keep turf in outstanding condition. On this episode, Dr. Lookabaugh is going to provide insight into controlling two major diseases on warm season turf, spring dead spot and large patch. But before we get to our conversation with Dr. Lookabaugh, a word from our disease discussion partner. If you're looking for reliable disease protection for your turf, look no further than Airmax Intrinsic brand fungicide. This powerhouse of a solution features a dual-active, broad-spectrum formulation that delivers advanced control of up to 26 diseases like snow mold, large patch, brown patch, and dollar spot. Plus, the powerful plant health benefits of Intrinsic brand fungicides can help grow more resilient turf from the roots up. Add it to your rotation today to own your season and take fairways to the max. Visit betterturf.basf.us to learn more. Also, remember to always read and follow label directions. Now on to our conversation with Dr. Lookabaugh. Well, Dr. Lookabaugh, thanks for joining the Disease Discussion podcast again. We've had quite a few of these conversations over the years, and I'm always excited for them. We're recording this podcast in the fall. What can potentially make this time of the year so perplexing for disease control on warm season turf?
Well, when it comes to warm season turf grass, really the fall is the most important time of the year. This is when the soil-borne pathogens that cause diseases like take-all root rot, spring dead spot, and large patch, this is when those pathogens are most active and when they're actually doing all of the damage that we usually will see later on. So we're trying to get ahead and apply all of those protective fungicide applications to actually prevent those infections before we ever see the symptoms on the turf grass. So now is also when warm season turf grass is most vulnerable because it's when our warm season turf like Bermuda grass, like zoysia grass, it's when it's most stressed. Our temperatures are cooling down, the days are getting shorter, the warm season turf is just slowing down, it's not growing, and so that means your turf is not going to recover as fast. And so if we have these root diseases that are taking out our root systems, that's obviously going to leave the turf in a really bad spot going into winter, and then it definitely reduces our chances of that turf coming back out of winter unscathed.
You're good at this, Dr. Lookabaugh. You already answered my next question, but let's go into that a little bit in more detail. How critical are months such as November and December for ensuring turf exits dormancy in the spring in a good spot?
I would say it actually starts earlier than that. So we really need to be thinking about fall prevention in September and then making those applications in October and in November because that's when those critical apps are going out. Once we go dormant, it's really just a waiting game to see how we're going to fare at green up. And so, getting ahead, planning, just as summer's ending is really important to make sure we get those apps out on time.
What should golf course superintendents focus on in the fall to ensure a positive start in the spring?
Right now, we're really looking at, turf stress. And so it varies if we're visiting courses in the transition zone versus down south when the pressures are going to be very different. So like in Florida and the Gulf Coast, we don't go dormant. So courses are gearing up for a season of very heavy traffic and play. And then as we go further north, we're really focused right now on, cleaning up lingering messes from summer and then getting those preventative applications out. So the more stress you have on these courses, whether it's from hurricanes and heavy rainfall, whether it's from high traffic, things like nematode pressure or poor fertility, these are all the types of stresses that are really contributing to the lower quality turf. And so we know that, stress turf is going to be weak turf. So as we look at turf grass right now and, prepare for those applications and going into winter, that's what becomes most important, is minimizing the stress when we can and making sure our turf is protected for all the things that we really can't affect. We can't change the weather and that sort of thing, so we're trying to just protect it as best we can.
When you're visiting golf courses and research sites this time of year, what are you looking for, and what commonalities do you observe among turf that is withstanding fall disease pressure?
So a lot of it is just, the stuff I just said, it's turf stress. And so, these courses where you have obviously, whether it's they came out of summer and they had a lot of drought stress, or they'd been sitting in, water after a hurricane, all of those things are definitely going to influence what we see in terms of disease as we go through winter as well. And so that's the stuff we're looking for. And we're trying to, prepare for that and see what we can change and what we can't change. So looking at their history of problems, like what sort of issues did they have last year, because chances are they're going to have similar problems this year. And so it's really about putting it all together and mapping out a plan to protect the turf grass.
Okay, we're going to focus on two diseases in particular on this episode, spring dead spot and large patch. Let's start with spring dead spot. How do fall conditions and decisions affect what might or might not happen with spring dead spot a few months down the road?
Spring dead spot is probably the most destructive disease on warm season turf. I mean, it kills the grass, and we're left with dead patches that you've got to look out well into the summer. You end up with uneven surfaces, and then you end up with a ton of weed pressure coming in where that turf has died. And so it's a total mess when you have to clean it up after the fact. So the pathogen, it's infecting in the fall, it's weakening the root system, but what really is taking the turf out is winter kill. So the roots are weak, they're so weak that the turf just doesn't make it out of winter alive. And so years where we have active falls, favorable conditions for the pathogen to be actively infecting for maybe a longer window, followed by harsh winters, so, below normal temperatures or longer periods where we're getting winter weather, we're definitely going to see more spring dead spot. So sometimes it's hard to predict just how bad a year it's going to be for spring dead spot, but you can usually count on, if we have, worse winters, you're going to see more disease.
What makes Bermuda grass susceptible to spring dead spot?
So it's the root disease. The pathogen eats away at the root system over time. That's going to weaken the plant, and like I said, it's going to be more susceptible to winter kill, because the weaker that warm season turf is going into winter, year after year we have winter kill issues on Bermuda, and it's all back to, poor root systems usually, and so you're going to see more of it when your root systems are weak. There's other root infecting pathogens that we're dealing with at the same time, and then you even have things like nematodes that are playing a role. We also see a major negative relationship with our root-inhibiting pre-emergent herbicides. And so courses that have a history of heavy DNA-type herbicides, or they have a heavy history of using, other root-pruning herbicides like indaziflam, usually those courses are also going to have way more problems with spring dead spot and also with winter kill, because those herbicides are also, weakening the root system. And so you end up with this complex of, pathogens, and then also chemical influences on the turf grass. And so this starts affecting not only our need for preventative fungicide applications, but we also have to question now our herbicide selections, especially in the fall when that turf is not actively putting on new roots to compensate for any injury. I think one thing when we're talking about managing all this is actually looking at your roots periodically, pulling core samples. Do I have roots or not? And I think that can give us some indication of the overall turf quality, but then also how it may go through the winter.
What makes zoysia grass susceptible to spring dead spot? Are they the same principles you just mentioned, or are there some differences?
So I would say really, I mean, we mostly see spring dead spot on Bermuda grass. That's not to say it can't be on other warm season turf. And a lot of it is the same factors. It's, a pathogen that is weakening the root system, and then you're ending up with death because of, winter kill and some of these other factors. And so it just weakens the plant over time. And I think sometimes we don't pay close enough attention to our roots on, whatever turf type we're growing. And I think if you look at the roots and you actually see how much roots do I have here, it can actually answer a lot of the questions we have on, disease management, because we need to focus on our roots a little bit more. But yeah, mostly we're seeing issues on Bermuda grass, particularly Bermuda grass fairways, when it comes to spring dead spot.
Dr. Lookabaugh, what are some recommended strategies for building an effective spring dead spot control program?
So preventative fungicide applications are critical. But more than that, it's actually focusing on root health as a whole. So we've already sort of talked about that. Most of these root diseases are complexes, whether it's with other pathogens, things like Pythium. We've talked about nematodes being, a factor. And then also you have things like fertility, herbicide use that can influence disease severity. And so I think when you're trying to develop strategies to control these, you really have to look at your year-long program in a more comprehensive way. It's looking at how all of those seasonal applications fit together, because sometimes, we are having to implement management strategies well ahead of when we are actually going to see symptoms on the turf grass. And I think for some people that's hard to plan ahead. And really, that's what we're doing is we need to plan our year in advance so that all of those applications kind of fit together and we prep ourselves for the strongest turf we can have going into those stressful months that we know are going to happen. So, on warm season turf grass, the shoulder seasons really are the areas where you want to focus a lot of time and energy, because those are the most critical timings for a lot of management, practices.
Speaking of timing, what should superintendents be aware of when timing their spring dead spot control applications?
So timing really is everything. It's super critical. When it comes to spring dead spot, we start our preventative fungicide applications when your soil temperatures start averaging about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So for a lot of areas in the transition zone, most of the time those applications start in October. And then we do at least two. For most people, two is all you need. Two applications, either 21 to 28 days apart, of a fungicide that works for spring dead spot. So typically those two fall apps will give us excellent control.
Okay, what are some proven fungicides for spring dead spot control, and what makes those fungicides effective options for golf course superintendents?
From BASF, Navicon Intrinsic and Maxima are excellent options. Those are our go-to options for spring dead spot. Lexicon also is a great option. They consistently perform well in university trials. Other products that are great for spring dead spot are things like Posterity, and then those Posterity premixes. Tekken, Kabuto, all of those are also great options. But really the most important thing when making those fungicide selections is how you're going to apply them. Because remember, this is a root disease, and so we need to water in the applications to be effective. And so that means either putting it out in a very high volume, but more effectively, it's watering in those applications immediately before the sprays have dried, with at least 1/8 of an inch of irrigation, more like 1/4 of an inch of irrigation. So that's a lot of water behind those applications. And unfortunately, there's plenty of research that has shown if you do not water in these fungicides, you're basically wasting that application, because you're not going to get the level of control you would if you water them in. So it's kind of a make or break it type thing in some situations. And so putting the water behind it really is critical. So it's not just about the fungicide selection, it's about making sure you put it out so that it's actually going to be effective.
You've devoted a lot of time to studying spring dead spot. In your mind, what's the future of spring dead spot? Where are we headed with this disease?
There's actually a lot of exciting research that's been coming out of universities in the last few years. So Virginia Tech, they're doing really cool stuff looking at aerial mapping to actually deliver precision applications. So instead of spraying, expensive fungicides wall to wall, they can use machine learning to target those applications to very specific areas on the course. Because remember, a lot of these diseases, we tend to see them in similar places year after year. And so if you can map out those locations, you can have more effective sprays. So this can help our superintendents not only save budget, but it can also increase their flexibility to spray those higher quality products that are more effective when they actually need more control. There's also a lot of research coming out of the University of Tennessee that's showing that relationship between spring dead spot and those pre-emergent herbicides. And so I think this is going to lead to some major changes in not only how we approach the disease management side of things, but also how we manage our fall herbicide applications, specifically applications that are targeting POA annua. So it's really going to affect a lot of people's herbicide selections as well when we start talking about, which mixes to use and which herbicides to put out in the fall versus, say, herbicides that we maybe should leave to those spring and summer applications. So a lot of cool stuff with spring dead spot, and I'm excited to see kind of where that goes.
Before we move on to large patch, is there anything else you want to mention about spring dead spot that we haven't discussed, Dr. Lookabaugh?
Really, when it comes to spring dead spot, the thing to remember is fungicides won't wake the dead. And so, those preventative applications are so important because if you end up with all these dead patches of turf in the spring, it's going to be a mess that you're looking at for months and months. And so, putting in the effort up front goes a long way for your year-long control.
Before we get back to our conversation with Dr. Lookabaugh, another word from our disease discussion partner. One size doesn't fit all. That's why BASF offers the industry's leading Design Your Own early order program. The Design Your Own program allows you to get exactly what your course needs in the exact quantities you require with the ability to earn rebates of up to 33%. Backed by innovative chemistry, the BASF EOP helps you own your season without added complexity and stress. Now's the time to secure the best of the best brands at our best price all year, including Aramax Intrinsic brand fungicide, Tower herbicide, and more. Ask your BASF sales rep about the BASF 2026 early order program or visit betterturf.basf.us/EOP to learn more. Always read and follow label instructions. Now back to our conversation with Dr. Lookabaugh. Okay, let's move on to large patch. How prevalent has this disease become, especially on zoysia grass?
Large patch has always been a problem, and if you grow zoysia, you are going to have to manage large patch. Same with if you're growing seashore paspalum. You're going to see this disease, and prevention needs to be a part of your seasonal spray program. There's no doubt about that. You have to prepare, and it's a given. You're going to have to make preventative large patch applications.
So the disease has always been there. I guess I should have asked the question differently. There's been more zoysia grass planted on golf courses, so that's probably one of the reasons why it's become more prevalent, Dr. Lookabaugh?
Yeah, so there's more and more zoysia going out. A lot of courses are starting to convert. And with that, we're really going to have to shift a little bit the approach we take to warm season fairways in particular because, in the past, people didn't make a lot of applications on Bermuda fairways because, our disease pressure outside of, say, spring dead spot, we didn't have a major disease pressure on our Bermuda fairways. But now as you start converting a lot over to zoysia, we're not only having to put out, applications to control large patch, but you're also going to have to make a lot more fungicide applications to control dollar spot. So, some of these turf types, like zoysia, like seashore paspalum, they can be a little bit more intensive, and we may actually end up, having spray programs on fairways that look more reminiscent of like a cool season fairway spray program than we ever really had to do on warm season fairways.
What makes large patch challenging to control?
I think the biggest thing is people wait too late to spray. So they wait until they actually start seeing symptoms. But then, at that point, we're behind the power curve. Not only do we have to stop the pathogen from, causing new infections, but we also have to wait for the turf to recover from that damage that's already occurred. And so remember, by the time you see symptoms, there is way more disease there. And so it started a lot earlier before you could ever see it. And so you're way behind in terms of cleaning up that disease and recovering from it. And so I think the biggest thing is it's not because we don't have great fungicides. It's not because they're not super effective. It really is about timing and people just waiting too late and then just trying to play catch up. And by that point, it takes a lot longer. You look at the damage longer, and you also need higher rates and more fungicides when we're in that curative type scenario.
What commonalities do you observe among effective large patch control programs?
Biggest thing is, one, in the fall, that's when those preventative applications are going out. And so for most areas, similar to spring dead spot, we're usually targeting 70 degrees Fahrenheit to start our first application, particularly for zoysia grass. We wait until 70 degrees. If you're like in, lawn situations or St. Augustine, centipede grass, those apps actually need to occur a little earlier, so that's more like 75 to 80. But for zoysia, it's that same target, 70 degrees. Most effective large patch programs include at least 2 fall applications 28 days apart. Now, if you're further south where your turf doesn't go dormant, you may actually need to continue those fall fungicide applications through the winter as long as your soil temps are, staying above 55 degrees because that pathogen is still going to be active. So in the transition zone, we can do 2 fall apps and be clean, totally clean. If you're in Florida, places like that, you may need 3 or 4 applications depending on, your temperatures because you have a much longer window where your conditions are favorable for infections. Similarly, when we make these applications, you are going to put a little bit of irrigation behind it.
What's the most important thing a superintendent should consider when selecting a fungicide for large patch control?
When it comes to large patch, you have a bunch of effective fungicide options. We have some of the older DMI, fungicides that are still effective. And then we have newer products like Aramax Intrinsic, Acernity, Densicor. Those are all very effective and consistently perform really well. And so budget obviously comes into play somewhat when we're talking about large patch because we are usually spraying, wall-to-wall bigger areas in terms of prevention. And you also need multiple applications for control. And so I think fungicide selection goes hand in hand with, your budget. Also, when we're selecting fungicides, I mentioned it already, but you want to make sure you're getting the most out of that application. So putting out some irrigation behind those applications can help improve efficacy, get a little bit better residual out of these products. But you really do have a lot of options, and in particular, some of the newer fungicides have been fantastic on large patch.
Let's talk about one of those newer fungicides, and I can't believe it's been 1.5 years since Aramax Intrinsic brand fungicide has been in the market. It seems like it was 2 days ago that BASF released it, but what feedback have you and the team received about Aramax Intrinsic brand fungicide as a large patch control solution?
Aramax consistently performs really well in large patch trials, and now that we've had it out on courses, it's done a fantastic job keeping fairways clean. We are very confident in the level of protection that you're going to get with Aramax. We also last year launched the Large Patch Max Assurance program, and that's a way for superintendents to switch over to Aramax with the confidence of a support program backing those applications. But really with Aramax, you get way more than just large patch. You also get fantastic dollar spot control, and you get all those plant health benefits. So things like improved root growth, tolerance to winter stress. And so that really makes Aramax, a great choice for your large patch prevention, or at least to anchor your fairway applications. And so it provides a really nice, fall and spring solution.
What more can you tell our listeners about the Large Patch Max Assurance Program? Maybe some of them are hearing about it for the first time. What does that program entail, Dr. Lookabaugh?
Basically, we split the country into zones based on, where you are, disease pressure, and we have a selection of options. Most of them are, 2 fall applications and maybe a 3rd application depending on where you are in the country. And basically, we assure control of large patch in the treated area. And should you have breakthrough and contact your BASF rep, we will provide a solution to clean up any issue. And so it's a great way for people who haven't used Aramax to try it for the first time, knowing that if they have any problems, BASF is going to support them. And so it's been pretty successful, and I'd say if you want more information on that, definitely reach out to your local BASF sales rep, and we have a flyer and, a website, and so we can send you all that information.
Anything else you want to add about large patch and large patch control that we haven't discussed?
I think the biggest thing is, stay ahead of it, get those preventative apps out. I mean, now is the time to be making those, and so kind of don't get behind.
All right, last thing here. 2025 has been a frantic year pretty much for everybody that works in the golf industry, but where can superintendents find you and the BASF team over the second half of the fall and during the winter? What can they look for from your team, Dr. Lookabaugh?
Right now, we're kind of neck deep in EOP.
Yeah.
So most of us are supporting distribution and superintendents as they plan for next year. So we're having a lot of conversations about, planning spray programs and planning those applications, figuring out what people are going to need as they move into 2026. That's kind of what we're doing for the next couple months, but we'll definitely be around whenever you need us. Obviously, we're starting to gear up for the golf show. All the planning for that starts early, and so we'll see everybody there this winter. But we're around whenever you need us. Just call us, text us, whatever. We're here.
Well, it's always a joy to speak with you, Dr. Lookabaugh. Thanks for taking the time to join the Disease Discussion podcast again. I think you might be the guest that's been on this the most of any guest we've had over the course of the series. And thanks for everything you do to help so many in the golf industry.
Yep, thanks for having me.